Yeah, so we'll see.
Right. Yeah. Also, yeah. Second. So.
Friend and she was not just.
Yeah, then it's. So there's no change.
Summer.
Yeah. Hi, how are you? Seeing what's it? It's for. So, this career, yeah, race. He said there's some acid to me. It's coming. But yeah, get her.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, but yeah. I think it's yeah, just lost the reference. Excellent. Yeah, it's great. I think it's so. That's we have read that. This is really it's so much. It's very good. No, it wasn't. I mean, you saw it's a nice joke. Alright. So then we go with my humans, tags, where we have the tag shares, and what parts. It's north here. Also, so I read the yes, so all that's the stack. Yes. You can and where did you move in? Busy. I live in EST chairs. No, it's linear. Just don't pay finance. Put it. 1 year. That we all. It's all.
Not, yeah, kind of just.
Every year. Right. Yeah. So, hey, everybody. How are you? Great. That's good. Thanks for being here. Good to see you all. Lambert's best and brightest. Everybody else was outside the room. Well, we're recording. Yeah. Go back.
It's a very high.
No, we don't leave recording. That's right.
Pool is very.
Anyways, welcome. It's good to have you back. We have a couple of people here who weren't able to make the first one. I'd like to give a shout out to them, especially Joe and Brendan, Margaret on behalf of Danny Popkin and Jim Harris. I think everybody else was here last. Oh, Bob Clerica, who was a city engineer for many years, right? Bob lives here in town at Rock Creek Woods. So just to reiterate, so I'm very happy with the focus group. Think that my idea here was to represent as many people, stakeholders in the community as possible. Just for people who weren't here last time, or for the people who may be watching, we do have a few people kind of in the webinar tonight. Here residents who live in virtually every neighborhood. We have residents who live in a flood zone, outside the flood zone, residents who are engineers, residents who are planners. We really have a nice cross section. We have Bob from the St. John's here, with some business owners here, and some landlords. So we have a nice mix of people here, and I really think that this is a good representation of the community. So thanks again for being here, and thanks for being willing to have these conversations, being a part of this process. And I'm going to turn it over to Clay Emerson, who's going to kind of run the show, and I'm always happy to answer questions as need be. Thanks.
Thanks so much for here. Yeah, and just to reiterate what you said, thank you so much again. I said this the first time, but I understand you all are volunteering your time and, more importantly, your knowledge and insight that you bring from I'm sure I've collected many decades of experience with living in the wonderful city of Lambertville. So most of you were here for the first meeting. We have just a little bit of recap to remember kind of the bigger picture, and then we'll get into some of the things that we promised we would talk about the last time. Yeah, basically a little bit of review. Is that good for everyone? Yeah, thank you. Um. And we'll get into some of the programmatic and organizational review, some of the results there. Um, and the big thing that was happening that was underway last time was the digitization and land use analysis. Um, that is, some, I guess, arguably exciting results to share if there is such a thing in an effort like this. Is it okay if I just wander around in front here? Is that okay with everyone not in front of too much? Um, and most importantly, the feedback and discussion, that's really the whole point of this focus group. So hopefully we'll have plenty of time for that. I'm not gonna belabor too much here. So the rules, so to speak, are the same as they were last time, no new rules. We do want to hear what everyone has to say. And I think last time we had a lot of good discussion, getting feedback from the vast majority of us. And you don't have to have something to say, but if you do, please feel free to share. That's why we're here. There's no judgment zone, as they say. Keep an open mind, share whatever relevant information you're able to. Focus on interest, not position. And let's all keep each other honest when it comes to these things. Okay, so your role also, this slide is the same as it was last time. As the mayor noted, he has put together a focus group that has people represented from all different, not just physical parts of the city, but also there's a lot of smart people in the room with relevant not just insight, but experience, quite frankly. So that's why you've been asked to be here, and again, we appreciate your participation. So just really not near as much as last time's, same slide as last time. I know there's a couple new faces, and I think we can't discuss a topic without making sure that we all have the basic understanding that's just in these two slides, the concept of a stormwater utility. But the idea is creating a fair and equitable fee assessment across a wide variety of users, and I have some contrasting landscapes here, not from the city of Lambertville. But you can see in this particular community, this is in New Jersey, and this could be any town, New Jersey, right? You have your residential areas, and you have your commercial areas, so to speak. And there's obviously, if we're talking about stormwater runoff and impervious cover, these two images are clearly very different. You can imagine that that if you were to have an equitable fee across these different users of this landscape, that it would need to reflect what the difference that you see here. And the process that we're in is a feasibility study. And this is something that really needs to be tailored to your particular community, because although these photos here could be a lot of different towns in New Jersey, they're not Lambertville. And every community has its own unique characteristics. And I think Lambertville, for good reason and in a good way, is extremely unique. Both in the landscape, as well as the stormwater and flood concerns that are a reality for residents here. Okay, so stormwater utility, generally speaking, almost exclusively impervious cover is used as the water meter, so to speak. Readily measurable, equitable and easy. And then every community has certain expenditures that can be associated with stormwater management, drainage in general. So you have a required revenue to provide the level of service that's acceptable to your residents. And you have a total amount of impervious covered, and you just do the relatively simple math. And last time I promised you that, I didn't have any numbers to share, so to speak, with regards to either the numerator or the denominator here, and we do have much more of that to share today. So, this mouse thing is rather sensitive. So, more or less the same timeline as you saw last time is here again, and we're just moving along in this process. It's not a perfect layout of things, but it's a rather accelerated process. And we are at the second focus group meeting. Some of the stuff in here around the February-March frame is underway right now. Some things are being wrapped up as we speak, specifically the programmatic and organizational review memo and the user fee rate options and summary. We don't have that to share tonight. We didn't expect to, but we will have it to share. And this is not reflected in this timeline. On April 23rd is when we're probably going to have the first public meeting on April 23rd. This isn't in your notes. This is the first time you've heard of it. I like to tell people that. So that I always have that moment. Have I heard this before? Is this the first time I'm hearing it? Yes, it's the first time you're hearing it. That's a Tuesday night. We would love for you to be here for a number of reasons. I know we're asking a lot of you with the 3 focus group meetings already, but we'll circle back to that at the end, that April 23rd public meeting. Okay, so moving along. So summarizing some of the organizational review, what goes on. You all probably realize this fair amount from the first meeting. Just in concept, we knew these are not shocking findings here, right? There's a need for increased cross-jurisdictional cooperation. So think of like a DOT system that intersects city system and things like that. We spent a lot of time in the last meeting talking about the new welcome to the Tier A DEP requirements in terms of your MS4 permit. And I think if there was a single theme from the first meeting, unfortunately, it was probably this third bullet point here as it relates to flooding and the realization, the reality of that for many residents. And the fourth bullet point here, drainage system has been reactive maintenance such as blockage removal. That's not surprising. That's a reality for most municipalities. And one thing that's unique about Lambertville, somewhat unique, is it is at near complete build out. And that's not the case in all municipalities. So I don't expect you to be able to read all this. But this is kind of a layout of the organization at the city as it relates to stormwater management, or stormwater in general, drainage. So the council and the mayor, stormwater program coordinator, which in this is essentially the mayor. And then you have another line of organization here, and then in the green, which you probably can't read, are the individual tasks. So if we pick on the city clerk, for example, because that's what we do, administration, public relations, communications, grant management, bidding, and stormwater pollution plan production, all things that relate to stormwater management. Do a lot. She does a lot more than that, but these are just those tasks, and you can see the different things, entities, most notably Department of Public Works. We're the ones actually doing most of the actual work itself or maintenance. But it's a complex picture, maybe a little less complex in Lambertville than some other places, but but there's a lot to do and to summarize there. This will be in the memo, so you'll be able to see these individual tasks better than you can here. There's obviously a lot of information. Okay, so kind of in summary, as it relates to this, as I mentioned in the last slide, Public Works is whose shoulders a lot of this falls on. And quite frankly, the summary here is that they're not sufficiently staffed to do the things that it sounds like need to be done. Not just the new MS4 Tier A permit requirements, but if the goal, if the will of the people is to shift from a little less reactive and a little more proactive, the current Public Works Department doesn't have the capacity, quite frankly, to do that. As I mentioned before, the mayor serves as the stormwater program coordinator in a very arguably too hands-on approach. I think I was at a conference with him and he mentioned that he had surveyed the inlets. And I was talking to someone else at lunch. I already mentioned this to you. And I said, no, when he said he literally, he surveyed the inlets or he mapped the inlets, he meant he literally did that. And I don't think people at the conference understood that. So hands-on it's a whole nother level here. But he does other things I understand here as well, besides map inlets. So that's an issue, right? Oops, this thing is awfully sensitive. So what are some of the current expenditures? And going back to the water meter slide, there's an acronym in there that I apologize for, LOS, or level of service. What is the status of expenditures on stormwater related things? What is being done? Currently, this is kind of a quick bullet list of those items. Obviously the proactive to some extent and reactive maintenance such as pre-storm cleaning and blockage removal is an ongoing issue, and maybe even more so. I would venture more so in Lambertville than a lot of communities. Everyone has problems with debris, but you have a very unique place in the landscape that you sit. We talked about that last time in terms of drainage areas and steeply sloped areas that drain into a relatively flat downtown and city, and that's a combination of things that is really going to exacerbate that first issue there. Administrative effort for stormwater related business kind of goes without saying. Attorney services, consulting engineering services, the MS4 Tier A requirements that are just kind of ramping up at this point. And then potential capital costs related to watershed protection improvement. That's kind of goes in line with the Tier A activities. That's the new DEP requirements that we spent a fair amount of time about last time. So let's see this thing. So what does that all boil down to? What's the number? Well, here is the estimate. I don't know if anyone if we had canvassed the group last focus group meeting, I wonder if we each had to offer a number, what that would have been. It would have been an interesting exercise, and we should have done that. But I probably wouldn't have gotten it right. And I don't know, it's a difficult thing, but what we did was we looked at those capital costs, the personnel and operating expenditures, and the staff that are in that organizational diagram and what portion of their time they spend on drainage related things. Right, none of them spend 100% of their time in this.
What street sweeper does?
Except for the street sweeper. Very good. Yeah, that's a good point. So that's the number. Again, it would have been interesting to venture a guess at that last time. So moving on from there, that's the current status, right? That's, the current annual estimate. But there are some other things that need to happen. Not just the DEP requirements, but also, if you wanna, we talked about, the Band-Aid kind of reactive approach for kind of planning and, knowing that parts of the city drainage infrastructure that requires the Band-Aids time and time again, and getting ahead of those, is a more proactive approach that would need to be taken, and you don't have the organizational structure to do that right now. So, yeah, I guess in other words, the simpler way to put it is what is not getting done and what needs to be done in the near and long-term forecast. So in short, and this is where the concept of a utility comes in, is if we've identified future needs, if the community, if the residents feel like from a stormwater drainage perspective, things could be improved. That costs money, that may cost more annually than the number that we had. And is there a better way to allocate that revenue than the current system? So the point of the impervious, if we go back to the which I won't dare do with this contraption here, but if we think back to the water meter slide, with the numerator and the denominator, how much money do you need to spend, how much impervious cover is there? And that's the concept of utility and how you can use impervious cover in that regard. So the analysis that we promised last time that we've done since then is this analysis of land use type and impervious cover. So I have some quick slides here, fit some pictures in here. These are not in the next couple slides here are not within Lambertville, but this is the process that we went through for the city, and this has been completed at this time. So a typical commercial property, and here's just a street view, kind of look at it. This could be again kind of any town. And then in the GIS system, you're looking at recent aerial images, and you're literally outlining the impervious cover for each parcel. The 4A there, some of you may be familiar with that, to what we're talking about here, but that's the New Jersey, the land use classification, which in this example is a commercial property, is 4A. So kind of tedious. Thankfully, I wasn't the one that did that. But we have people who would be a lot better at it than I am, that do that, probably a whole lot quicker too. And I just have a couple other slides of typical things that you would see in the city, a parking lot. A little easier to digitize something like this. But you can see how the impervious areas is outlined and can be quantified for each parcel. 15D, church and charitable property, another example. And you can see walkways, edges of buildings. Story is the same. So in Lambertville, typical street corner, the goal here was to take the roughly 1,500 residential properties and instead of digitizing all of those, which would be a massive effort with without the warranted return. What's often done is a representative sample is taken of those, and of that representative sample, and there's things that go into what makes it representative or not, that I don't think we need to get into all those details, but out of those 1,500 plus parcels, 76, roughly 5%. Were chosen, and that detailed analysis that I showed on the previous slides was completed. That's an important, and so does everyone understand that? We didn't do this process for every single property in the city. We did it for all the non-residential properties, but the residential properties, which are the majority of Lambertville, as I'll show you in a second, we just selected what we believe is a representative sample and analyze those in more detail. What did they say? So here's a quick screenshot of, where is this? I can't read the streets, but some of you might recognize that. Just, a typical section of Lambertville. Again, the 76 properties came from across the city, not from one square. You drop, it's not like a biological sampling where you drop your meter cube and or square meter and you count whatever it is you're looking at. This is across the whole city. And each one of those, so we have a histogram here. So there's bins. If it's been a while since you've seen a histogram, you're probably not alone. But what we're looking at is a distribution of the different impervious coverages of those 76. So if we add up the numbers, in the histogram, there's 76 and they're in bins. So most of those, or the most common of those 76 properties fell between 1,000 and 2,000 square feet of impervious cover, not lot size, impervious cover, and so on and so forth. So you get this characteristic distribution that will be different from one community to another, as it should be. And so you had some kind of outliers, so, but generally, again, the 1,000 to 2,000 square feet was the most popular, if you will. The median was right about between this, right at that bin at 2,022 square feet. And that's important because in the rate, in the potential rate options, typically what's used, the most common approach is this equivalent residential unit, or ERU. And this median from this analysis of that representative sample is usually what's used to set the billing rate, or not the rate, the value, but the billing unit is what I should call it. So that it has some real meaning for that community. And I shouldn't compare 2,000 to other utilities that are in existence, but I will, I guess. And I'll say that I looked at a number of them. There's a lot more utilities, as we talked about last time, in Pennsylvania, for example. And I looked at a couple dozen of those, mostly in many in southeastern Pennsylvania. And that 2,000 feet, I think, had in the ballpark. Like maybe the average of those, it was between 2,000 and 3,000. But of course, it'll be different from one community to the next.
That's one question.
Please.
When you say single family, obviously that means not the bigger apartment building, but is that also excluding buildings that look like they could be or were one single family but are now not?
Yeah, so there was a little bit of it's the there we go. Sorry, I have a little, I think that'll work thing there. Okay. Yeah, it's a good question. If it was residential in the land use code, that is what triggered that. So it doesn't mean that there's only a single family, that it's only a single family dwelling. I guess that is kind of a interesting distinction that I didn't anticipate.
I have a question as well.
Please.
Is the 76 kind of like that that test group or whatever you would call it? do you? Are there separate groups throughout the town residentially? Cause like. The makeup up the hill is much different in terms of the size of lots,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So do you have different representatives throughout? Different areas of the town,
Yes.
even downtown parts of, are very different. Some in terms of, how much property there is or how much impervious there might be.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where a couple of these outliers came from. And I looked at the map that, I shouldn't call them outliers. It's just what it is. They just are far away from the pack here. You've got one out of the 76 that showed up over 9,000, which is, 3 times the median. So yeah, these come from throughout the city, and I remember both of these are, I think, to the north. I'm not exactly sure where they are. I mean, obviously we have that information, but we look to get a representative. One of the things that the reason I call this representative is one of the things that we look at when we select those 76. It's not a random, shotgun approach, like we're going to select, 76 random numbers between 1 and 1,500. It's not that. We look at the distribution of parcel sizes for getting impervious cover and try and make sure that our sample evenly selects from that distribution of the actual parcel total size. And then we, without knowing anything about the impervious cover yet. And if we have a representative sample based on parcel size, then we take those and go. And there's a little bit, because it's not huge. We do look at the map. We have a map here and kind of make sure that there aren't some characteristic, some differences like that aren't captured. Like and there might have been an adjustment or two to make sure that we got some of those unique places. But a lot more went into it than just what I said, in making sure that was represented. And after the fact, I went through and just pretended that I hadn't seen any of that analysis or whatever, and kind of panned around in Google Earth through the city with that 2,000 square feet in mind. And it felt pretty good. I mean, I like knowing what went into it, but in the end, if you're going to tell me a number or result, like I'm going to pretend that I don't know how you got there and ask myself if it makes sense. And it did. Yeah, so the main question, or the whole purpose of a utility, of course, is to say, now that we have this information, now that we know something about the denominator in that equation, that was the impervious cover, what about the numerator? How are we currently, how are the residents of Lambertville currently paying for the stormwater costs, the drainage system, all those services that are outlined in the organizational chart that was full of information. And so basically who currently pays and how might this change under utility? So I guess this is, if there were exciting results, this would be that. The first pie chart here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a series of 3 pie charts and another diagram, and I'm going to kind of explain things one step at a time. One thing I'll say before we get into the numbers, the colors are consistent from slide to slide. So if you get used to the colors, you can see they're in order. The biggest piece of the pie is the top working down. The numbers, the entries that are reflected means they're non-zero. They're rounded to the nearest percent. So if you're confused by seeing 0%, that means it's less than 0.5%. But I kept it up there because it does exist. But I don't, in these kind of situations, I don't like to get distracted by decimal places. So let's talk about things that matter. But if anyone's wondering why this is 0%, that's why. If it's 0.3 versus 0.2, it's not worth our time to talk about. That's the way I look at it. So what is the distribution of land use types in Lambertville? So this is just a total count of independent of size of the parcels within the city. How many parcels are classified as residential? 75%. And that's that roundabout 1,500 number. And so, and how many are classified as commercial? 8%. And so on and so forth. So, again, independent of size, has nothing to do with impervious cover. Lambertville is dominated by residential parcels, not news to anyone here. So this might be a little more news for people here to a certain extent, but remember, 75% of the parcels. How does that relate to the current tax revenue that is collected, and which portion of which, of course, goes to those drainage services? I don't know, maybe not particularly surprising here either. If you think about it, again, I wouldn't have felt comfortable in venturing a guess at this or the next slide last meeting without doing the analysis, but 80% of that is residential, 15% is commercial, and there's a couple other non-zero players here, but not many. Apartment, industrial, vacant land, other exempt, farm qualified, and these are the land use, the state land use codes. There's some, again, these are zeros, but there's some non-zero. If you ask me what parcel in Lambertville is currently classified as farm, qualified, or other exempt, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But we can dive into those details and in some of the reporting. So this is kind of the take home, is the comparison of the previous pie chart to this one. So the previous one, and I'll try and go back. Again, is just the tax revenue, but independent of impervious cover. And now if we go through all that analysis with the 76 parcel sample, the residential properties, in the detailed analysis of all the what we call non-single family residential parcels, that's the commercial properties, the industrial, to quantify every square foot of impervious cover on those properties, we see this. So what this pie chart is saying is that if everyone paid, not based on contributed to the stormwater drainage costs in a manner that was proportional to the impervious cover that were on the property, as opposed to the assessment of the property, which is kind of not really related to how much runoff you generate necessarily. Impervious cover, on the other hand, is a pretty good proxy for the amount of runoff or burden on the drainage system that a parcel has. This is how that distribution would change. So residential, they're paying for the majority of it, but contributing to a little more than half of it. Commercial, relatively unchanged. I think it was 15%, 16% here. The story, if there is one in here, again, I wasn't, there's nothing shocking here to me. Like, I didn't know what this was going to say either, but there was nothing really particularly surprising. I think it's interesting that if there's a story here, it's that the 80% for residential from the tax revenue percentage comes down to 54% of the impervious cover contribution. That's probably the headline, if you will, from this. And why? Where is that coming from? There's a lot of new players here, but a lot of small players. Like there's a whole. This list is much longer. There's a lot more slices of the pie, but it's not really dominated by any one of them. It's just like a lot of new little ones. Oops, we kept the colors the same, and Dana is a fan of these diagrams, and I am now too. So what we're looking at here is just a way to compare those last two pie charts. in one place, so. The thickness of this center blue line is 100%, the tax revenue, the current approach is here. And you can see the relative change as you go to a potential user fee or a stormwater utility, you can see the differences. Again, the take home here, if there's a headline, is that residential goes from 80% on the left to 54, commercial relatively unchanged. Apartments relatively unchanged, industrial bigger pickup. The differentiation between industrial and commercial properties not always clear to me. They have different definitions, but like you have to look on a parcel by parcel basis to see whether a property is commercial or industrial. If you just walk by it, I wouldn't always get that right. But yeah, a lot of new players, and none of them are particularly dominating the difference from that 26% decrease from the residential properties. So I guess a lot of information, and I didn't expect you to have any preconceived opinions on what this would look like last meeting, even as good participants and listeners and everything as you all were. I wouldn't have expected you to have any preconceived notions on what this might have looked like, but I guess that's if the next section here we have is kind of questions and then discussion. But the one kind of question I have for you, maybe to try and break the ice here, is, I don't know, was anything surprising here to you? Was there anything that kind of stood out, or and obviously if you have just general questions on what we did to get to that point, you know, this would be a good time to ask those as well.
On that last slide, the previous slide. Shouldn't the public property be divided, like 80% goes to residential and 15% goes to commercial because it's ultimately paying?
So on
On the right, public.
the right,
property.
so the
Public
reason,
property doesn't pay for itself.
right, so right now, that's right, no one does. What this is saying is not that anyone's paying for it, it's just that in that public of the impervious cover, do you understand where I'm going?
I understand exactly where you're going, but I'm saying if you're gonna have a potential user fee, 80% of the public property user fee is gonna go back to residential.
Yes,
Likewise, public schools.
yeah,
So I would argue that on that chart, to portray more of a message, that should be reflected.
okay,
But doesn't the public currently pay for all of it? I just mean, if I'm thinking about the logic of as it's going through here. In essence, the public is funding 258,000 on whatever we have to do for the stormwater. And in this scenario, and it's all coming out of the public, the residential taxes and the commercial taxes, I agree with you. I'm just saying, what would probably happen here is you'd say, okay, well, the public is now assessed this much and their 258 share to some degree drops. And all that money goes into the pool of the stormwater authority.
I think that it's steps to get into that point.
Yeah.
So like, this is one step for us to understand. The real story here is properties that don't pay taxes, don't pay taxes. Like, it's not, it's not- they have an impact on this.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so ultimately, when the fee gets levied, that's gonna be a big conversation. Do properties that don't pay taxes owe anything towards stormwater?
right, and that's, and that is, of course, the big question here. Well, it's not the big question necessarily, because the enabling legislation from 2019 said that it had the only exemption is farm property. So it's not a question. It's not a question of whether or not they would. It's just that that's a big change. For those.
Would that be a decision that the municipality makes, or is it a requirement?
As I understand it, it would not be a decision that the
Oh, okay,
municipality could make.
okay, that would be really important for people to understand.
It is, very much so, yeah. Yes, Mary. I'll go
Some of us live in HOAs, and each of us who owns a property in an HOA owns a little parcel of land similar to the rest of town. But the HOA owns a bigger parcel of property. Where does that HOA owned property fall into this?
Of the common property,
Yeah,
I may have to get back to you on that, Mary Ann, because,
because currently the HOA is not paying property taxes.
right.
So I was wondering if it's other exempt, I have no idea.
That might be, that might be what it is. Would you believe that relatively that slice of the pie looks like that could fit your definition here too? I'll have to poke into the data and see exactly where some of those are. Maybe I'll get your HOA or your address if you don't mind afterwards, and I'd
No.
like to just look at that one example. Yes.
I'm just assuming that the parking lots are assigned to whatever, however they're owned, commercial, school. So the school would include the parking lot. The church would
Right,
include
it's
the parking lot.
whatever parcel they're within,
Right.
whatever land use code is associated with that, yeah. There was a question over there, Janine, I think.
Yeah, so back to like one of the original, the earlier questions. So the categories on this side would be,
The right side?
I'm sorry, yeah, the right side, would be contributing and not really exempt from taxes. They would be contributing to this fee.
Yeah, the right side may or may not be currently paying taxes. The right side is totally independent from the left side.
Okay,
And the only thing that's unique is they're, the same classifications, but let's ignore the left side for the moment. This is the distribution of impervious cover in the city of Lambertville. 54% of the impervious cover in Lambertville roughly is residential. 16% of the impervious cover is commercial, and so on and so forth down the list.
okay.
So that, you could forget the tax revenue completely, you could forget everything and just think of this right side as a general representation of how the impervious cover is distributed among the different parcels.
Okay, so I'm not positive of what our role is at the meeting, the public meeting. But I'm anticipating that, one of the questions may be, well, if we were, holding 80%, we were paying for 80% of the cost of stormwater.
As a
and
resident.
now- And now we're over here at 54, what does that mean for our tax bill? Are we gonna get not taxed on that little percentage, but we'll get a utility fee? Instead, will taxes stay the same, but just go to different, we'll just go to different
All very good,
programs? I'm
all
just
very good
trying to
questions, and-
anticipate what some of the questions would be, and I don't know what our role is there. I'm assuming I'm not gonna answer those kind of questions.
No, you're not.
But
No.
are we supposed to just listen and hear what everybody, well, first of all, if you could, you probably don't know those answers yet, but if you do,
No.
please share. But then really, what do we do there? We're just kind of listening and seeing what the concerns of residents are. Kind of questions they're bringing up.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your first question, and on the second one, I'm gonna punt it to my colleague, but the first question is. That right now, as I stand here, I don't know that answer. I didn't plan on knowing it. With the work that's going on right now, we'll have, by that meeting, we'll have some clarifications on the potential rate structure. Whether, as you said, will our regular taxes go down and we pay a fee, and would it net out? Will we still be at the same place? Definitely it will depend on which category you're in here, that much I can assure you. But those relative amounts depend on the financial forecast that's being done currently. Which takes that current level of service, that $250,000, and looks at what that could be under if the needs were being addressed in kind of the shift that we talked about. So the concept of a utility and the things that we're here to discuss are related to that that equitable, or this difference between the left and right side of the diagram. What is ultimately done in terms of the level of service and what needs to be done and the money that's gonna take, whether it's 250,000 or more or less, it seems like the word of the people here is that it needs to be more. That becomes a policy decision and something that that others will weigh in on. As far as your role, let me punt the second part of her question to Dana in terms of what we see your role to be in that meeting and between now and then.
Yeah, and just the current tax revenue is set by the council, right? And so that decision as to whether they're gonna shrink that if the stormwater utility is implemented, is gonna be a council, so. That we don't have.
We're happy to punt that question.
But public meeting, that we just scheduled. I think, you know, the folks in front of us, it's important to become ambassadors to the community and bring them out. We're gonna start from the beginning at that meeting to, like we did in the last meeting, kind of abbreviated presentation with this meeting and the last meeting to educate them on a stormwater utility, what it is, how it's gonna work, and get to some of the high level conclusions here. You guys had a really more in-depth presentation, but we're gonna cater that to the general public and get their, you know, thoughts, questions, comments, and take that into consideration. But I think your role really is to turn out people to that meeting, make sure that they know what's going on, so that it's not a surprise when it comes up. If, you know, when they hear about it in newspapers and that we want to get them there, we want to give them the opportunity to educate, to learn, to ask any question that they want. So that we can explain that to them so that everybody's on the same page. And I don't know if you want to add anything there.
I'm happy to talk about kind of policy and my views here. You know, obviously I'm just one person, but you know, and I don't want to get too sidetracked here in terms of policy, or what my view is. You know, when I think about the redistribution of costs for stormwater, you know, my goal would be to really move the system over to a utility that manages it. There would be, you know, there would be crossover, right? So some of the DPW people, you know, who wouldn't be a part of the utility might be, you know, on staff or doing things or whatever, right? So maybe, you know, this has not been, we've not gone too far down the road here, right? But maybe the MUA is it serves as the administrative agent in terms of billing, right? Maybe there's just one stormwater coordinator who works out of the DPW yard. So there's a lot of different approaches here. But you know, my goal eventually would be to shift it over to a more equitable, what I see as a more equitable system in terms of paying. You know, if you're part of the problem, you have to be part of the solution, kind of thing, right? And then, you know, making decisions, policy decisions about where we want to be in 5 years with stormwater. So we have all of these requirements. We have 34 modified or new requirements with the tier A. We'll find out at the next meeting. You know, with the mapping that we did this year, I know exactly what we're going to need in terms of, you know, hardware, you know, stormwater grates, retrofitted grates. I have all of these numbers. We did all the mapping. I've already had the
Granted, this won't have facilities, but we have huge expensive facilities. And we're looking at maintenance, we're looking at preventative stuff, we're looking at what's the schedule. And then we're looking at what the fees are coming in, and we're looking down the road at what debt service we're gonna have, we're looking at. You know, what's a reasonable, like, a tweak of the fee if we have to. I mean, that's the part of making this a utility that would be extremely helpful to have some control over maintenance of our stormwater system. And what's the biggest bang for the buck? What should we do first? What's critical? What's longer term? We're just responding now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that some of these numbers. And if this comes to pass and it's yet another fee that we're all paying, I of course am supportive, I'm supportive of it, but others may not be. It may help us with the regional conversation because more people may be able to quantify in their wallet, what is the cost of our neighbors not doing things? So we're gonna be paying for stormwater that is not just our stormwater. Because of our geography, we get everybody's. And we can't, of course, make any other municipalities do anything, but we can certainly advocate and we can have a louder voice. And we can start to drive some of those conversations over time. And I think we're gonna have to if we want to survive.
Even within Lambertville, I think that we need to emphasize the fact that, you know, we are all in this together and what we do matters. I mean, many of us live up the hills and we're much less subject to flooding than those on the lower parts of the city. And it has to be made clear, you know, what effect what we do on each of our properties has on the whole community and the health of the community.
Yeah, because you're paying on the hills just as much as we are on the flats, so your taxes, right? So,
Right, but maybe people are, you know, I think we're looking at two things, paying for all these new things for better stormwater management protection, but we're also trying to achieve behavioral change. And I think we need to give people an incentive for that. We need to, you know, make them understand what effect, what you do on your property, your tiny little lot, what effect that has.
yeah.
I do think that there's an addition here that you want to add in. I know you can't say exactly what you will do with the money. But I think typically what the money might be directed towards in terms of advancing it, because so far in these conversations, it's been very much on. We need to cover what we currently do, and we need to cover the tier A permit information.
Yeah, but it's more than that, you're right.
Right, and I think there's an element, it will then affect the dollar conversation.
Yeah.
Where you're not saying, we just need to cover the 258 and this 368
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
Instead, you're kind of saying, look, this is the intent, is that not only is it covering the ongoing. But it is covering the idea of how do we start reversing the impacts.
Right.
And I don't know that you have to call it out specifically with everything, but I think a couple of examples.
I can do that very easily, and we'll do that at the next.
Yeah,
meeting.
that's all I meant.
I've got numbers, I've got ideas. You know, my idea for the first 5 years is not to go whole hog, right? It's to come in, buy some equipment, make assessments. And have a better understanding of what our real issues are and what our long-term projections would be. So personally, I'm going to take a very conservative approach to the first 5 years of this. I think it's important for us to really understand where we are, and we don't know that because we have miles and miles of underground pipes that are in all stages of, you know, age and disrepair. We do upgrade our systems when we do road jobs, but that's, you know, 13 miles of roads here, so, you know, corresponding pipes underground. So I'm going to be a big proponent of just sort of understanding what the system is. In the next 5 years, we'll have a bunch of those costs for your next meeting.
Well, and I think you're gonna have this.
So you're just going to jump.
No,
Sorry,
Mayor,
yeah.
to
Okay.
elaborate on your point, do we have a digitalized inventory, asset inventory of storm basins, grates, inlets, culverts?
So as part of our MS4 tier A, I think we were talking about this. I'm out we have 575 inlets in the city, 1.2 square miles. So I know where they all are, and in fact, with the mapping software, after I did the mapping, the inlets and the outfalls, I got the DEP to send me a spreadsheet, so I know exactly how many bicycle safety grates, bike safety grates we need to put in, how many stickers we need to put in that say no drains to water.
So after we do a PM, we could see, okay, if it took 4 months for it to get dirty again or for it to clog, that we could start to set
Well,
those
yeah,
PMs.
we've got
accordingly.
those kind of systems in place now, so that's part
Would
of
that be a part of the 253,000?
No, that number will be higher. We're gonna have to hire somebody, we're definitely in the next year or so, gonna have to at least have more personnel dedicated to managing the tier A requirements. To 20, stormwater pollution prevention plan is 27 pages, took 3 of us a year to write it. I'm without exaggeration, meeting every Friday, almost every Friday, and getting, having it returned from the DEP 3 or 4 times before it finally was accepted, so it's a lot.
And that goes to someone's earlier point about, maybe it was you, Julie, about, don't talk about the size of the community as driving that number.
Right.
Mhm.
One question I have or would have if I were somebody coming to this meeting and just sort of worried about how it's going to affect my bottom line. In addition to just the question of, okay, so if we're going from 80% of the sort of burden for these costs being borne by people, residential property owners to 54%, but then, the amount of money that we're raising is going up, just sort of what does that look like? That's obviously my first question. But my second question is, when I look at the formula for how the stormwater utility is calculated, right? And that the numerator is the sort of needed revenue, the revenue that we would like. Doesn't that mean that if everybody puts in a rain garden, then the rate just goes up for everybody so that we keep getting to that revenue amount?
So I think you're saying is, could you credit your way out of the numerator? And
Yeah.
And I don't think you'll need to worry about that.
Okay.
We wish.
That's the short answer.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the long answer is the same. Most utilities have a cap on how much, and this is not, I thought it was in the 2019 legislation, it's not. Most utilities have a cap on how much of a credit you get, on each parcel, and it's usually like 50%. That would be a policy decision. Again, I thought it was in the act, I don't think it is. That says you can't give a credit for more than X%.
Yeah.
But, and again, we're getting a couple steps ahead, and I think the credit system is great because it's the one thing in New Jersey really right now where if you're a downstream person can expect some level of improvement in flooding, in water quality, and whatever. The credit system is the only thing in the state of New Jersey right now that I see it that is a reason why people can accept some improvement. The land development regulations are not there. The stormwater requirements are not there so that someone builds a site, things get better downstream. It's just try not to make things worse, and that doesn't always pan out. So the credit system is very important. But in my experience, people who do credits to get a credit in their utility, it's often not solely a financial driver. In other words, if you put yourself in a community where there's an existing stormwater utility and said, you know what, I'm going to get myself some credits, maybe you're a commercial property. If you looked at the economics and that was your only consideration, you'd be like, you probably would have a reaction like, nah, I'll just pay it now.
Yeah.
But if you have other things, if you want to do, there's plenty of other reasons to do retrofits, like we talked about, providing some improvement. Again, and I'm getting way ahead of ourselves. The individual landowner's decision on whether or not to do a project to, that's a personal decision that economics is just a part of it. And a lot of times, there are other factors that factor in. If, and we're talking about we might be talking about someone putting in a rain garden or doing some small rain garden versus a commercial property that might, you know, have the equipment and do a real serious capital improvement, an investment, if you will, to get relief, long-term relief in that utility fee. So that would be great if we could credit ourselves out of it, but it won't happen.
But I gotta make a suggestion, as an owner, I own 22 properties in town, most of them, or they're all commercial. And after Ida, only 2 of our properties got flooded, and those 2 were because of stormwater coming downhill. So I'd rather pay more, like you said, I'd rather be a part of the community, pay more into the fund to see preventative maintenance, to
That's
see things happening, opposed to making some capital improvement where
refreshing.
20 of my properties weren't even affected. So a lot of the properties in the donut hole of North Union, in Delavan, and those areas don't get affected. And our runoff really isn't making a difference. It's really, I think, would be better paying into that fund.
Yeah, to do things like the big culvert.
The big
Yeah,
culvert.
Absolutely.
Can I ask a question? I've been meaning to ask you this question for a while and I haven't asked it. So with a tiered structure, say you had a large commercial property right next to the river. And basically everything from their property, it's impervious, everything's running right down to the river. You know, I'm sensitive to the fact that depending on where you are in the city, you could actually be contributing less to a stormwater issue.
Right,
Basically,
right, this is the key.
Is that something that we can address or consider as we work through policy decisions about rates?
Two things on that. The tiered system is just towards the residential. It's just a more detailed way to break up that histogram. Instead of just calling it one at the median, it's maybe there's 3 steps. But your question is still the same on a commercial property. Again, on all the non-single family, it's the microscope. It's how many square feet are on this parcel, you know, with that detailed GIS analysis. But to your point, well, what if there's a property that doesn't discharge into one of these culverts that needs repair? That becomes a legal question, but the enabling legislation says it doesn't care. And arguably if that property in that hypothetical property in your example, there's arguments that could be made both ways there. Their business relies on the stormwater infrastructure for their customers to get there in the first place, right? They have to drive on those public roads that are serviced by the drainage system. So yeah, there is no waiver for anything other than the agricultural waiver. It doesn't say like if your property isn't serviced by the MS4, doesn't matter. And I think that they worded it carefully to make sure that stuff. But if I were that hypothetical property owner, that's a question that we should expect to get. You know, if there's a property like that. Perhaps, yeah.
Okay, one more for me, sorry.
Yeah.
Not about the fees and everything else, but one of the earlier slides that you showed us tonight had sort of a summary of some of the findings, and it said something about the non-flooding, not this one, non-flooding events or non-storm, if right before this one it was, no. Okay, city experiences frequent flooding even during small storms. So this was what, and I apologize, I was late because
Yeah.
another meeting, programmatic review reflection. Is this in the feasibility study, or what is this a programmatic review reflection of?
So this is just, the reflection is just looking back on some of the findings of looking at the organization, looking at the existing stormwater program of the city of Lambertville.
Okay.
And from the first meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I did feel that it's not just. I mean, this is not inaccurate. City experiences frequent flooding even during small storms. But I think there's also flooding in basements, like by properties that are not in low-lying areas, right? Properties that are not me. Do I just have a bad basement, or is there something going on with the stormwater system that the water fills up in my basement every time there's rain? So I don't know if that's something that we would you know, if that's something we need to reflect, if we should find out if a lot of people have that problem. I've just been used for 32 years, just been used to a wet basement.
They do. I can feel this question, don't mind. There's a lot of groundwater issues in town.
Okay.
Dan spoke to this at the last meeting. There are residents on York Street, North Franklin Street. You know, Ailey Creek used to go to Swan Creek and we made it go a different way. And there's still a lot of underground water moving through the city. And there's a high water table in places and basements flood. Sometimes you're in low-lying areas. We had some neighbors here at a zone planning board meeting not that long ago that talked about streams in their basement, you know, 4 or 5 months of the year.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of groundwater on top of that. I don't know to what extent stormwater utility could address the groundwater problems. And Bob Clark was shaking his head no, which would be which would I would think, right?
Some very specific situations where it might be.
It's a whole different animal.
Well, and it goes back to, Bob, I think we talked about it the last time around, it goes back to the idea of taking your comment about if this existed, this municipality existed. They might have some ability to have conversations upstream and things like that. And perhaps, maybe perhaps, but very offhand, that might affect some of the groundwater, the subsurface water that's moving through the ground. But it would be in alignment with that, not necessarily, you know, just wholly in the city itself.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't know that it was that extensive, what you're talking about, you know, like, do it to the realignment of that creek. So that also might come up at the meeting.
yeah.
I do think you'll have two types of people coming to the meeting. The one will be,
For it, against
yeah,
it.
well, I don't know about more against it. I think the one will be, how much is this gonna cost me? It's more money that I have to pay. And the other one will be, we need to be doing something and we should have done it years and years ago because this is happening so often. So I think it's about balancing those two voices as you're describing the need for this.
Well, I'd like to think that all of you came with an open mind. Maybe you didn't, but you were all willing to come. And, you know, the information is the information, right? So,
And I think what I heard here tonight is the money needs to be raised in some form. Not only to comply with permit, but also to take some other proactive actions to stop what's happening. And whether the city raises that money on the tax rolls, if it's $100,000, I use round numbers, on the tax roll, or $100,000 more in a utility, or I don't know, $100,000 more in some other way, it has to be raised. And so really the difference is and the city will have administrative and soft costs, which
Yeah.
you're including in all this forecast, and so will a utility have set up and soft cost, and so I guess if one is substantially more than the other, maybe that's a factor, but the current money isn't enough, more is needed.
it's not enough and it's just hard to organize, right? I mean,
Can be
it's,
proactive.
you know, I love doing this work. But I'm doing it, I spend 15 hours a week on stormwater. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. And I think it's really important that we talk about it and that we work through it. And whether it's, you know, what I think that the utility is the right thing to do here, obviously, but if it doesn't happen, we're still going to have these issues. And, you know, at some point down the line, there's going to be another one of these culverts that we missed and we couldn't take care of, and didn't devote time to, that we said, you know, the tax rate's already, you know, going after it or whatever, right? You know, this idea that we have to, this idea of being proactive, you know, as an option just doesn't sit well with me. You know, we've been reactive for so long, and to some degree, we're really paying the price for it, right? What, you know, all this localized flooding we have, it's because who has time to find out who's supposed to clean the culvert? I'm not sure it's, I mean, the DOT owns 50 yards of this culvert. Why don't they clean the first 50 yards? Because that's where all the sediment's coming in, right? So, you know, we could do these things endlessly at the municipal level and not get answers and not get things solved. It takes an enormous amount of work and resources. Why should the mayor have all the fun, right?
So once we know the number next meeting, what, do we also have a sense of the personnel and equipment?
We do, yeah. So I think that, I'm not gonna have it all put together, but I think I've got a pretty good sense of what we need for the next few years, at least in terms of our compliance and what we wanna do. So one thing I'll throw out, for example, and this is where, you know, a stormwater utility could dovetail pretty nicely with the LMUA. You know, they have a vacuum truck that we use occasionally when we have a very badly blocked catch basin. And I was doing some research. We paid $2,200 to have a pipe videotaped that was damaged, and you know, the LMUA has a routine system of kind of videoing all of their, all of their system. I don't remember what the formula is, 20% every year, and over 5 years you do it, whatever, right? So, you know, I'm very interested in sort of doing that for the storm sewer pipes. And you know, in the last 10 years, the video systems, the CCTV TVs, the robotic ones, you know, the systems have become much more effective and much less expensive. So you can now buy a truck with a video camera for $80,000, and you have to train someone, and you can do it yourself. You don't need to pay $2,000 for 80 feet of pavement, you know. So there are some costs that we can identify, and this would be, you know, something that the LMUA could use as well, right? So you know, there are economies and efficiencies here if we do kind of work with another, you know, utility. But yeah, so things like that, we've identified those costs. I worked with the engineer the last couple of weeks to kind of come up with some realistic expectations of what we might spend if we want to be a little bit more proactive in the next 5 years about understanding the systems.
And that would be one of the good early investments.
Absolutely.
For 5 years, yeah.
I mean, $80,000 is not necessarily a lot of money, right? For a piece of equipment that can give you a lot of information. Of course, there's going to be a lot of bad news, probably, but
Prioritize what you wanna look at.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
And Andrew, that's a great point, because I do that with my sewer lines, because we get a lot of root balls from the trees.
Yeah.
Into our sewer lines, and we do it once a year, we go in with the camera, we check it, and if it's clogged, we jet it.
Yeah, well, my second slide after that first one was about the Delavan, you know, the Delavan Streets pipe that we had to video as a contractor nicked it. And we videoed it to see what their damage was, and we found a ton of damage, not their damage, right? But we found 2 illegal connections that had been not even closed long ago. The pipe was just open, and the last 5 feet of the pipe was completely broken, and all the water was just draining into the earth, right? So you know, I was like, oh, this is great. This is just what I need on a Thursday or whatever, right? Well, anyway, I will have some of those costs and projections at next meeting.
That'll be at the April meeting or the?
No.
You could show me, yeah, and just to remember, Andrew is providing Mayor providing all the information to us, and we're building a cost model that is pretty robust to take into account all this information and, you know, what the cost would be to have a storm slate, all that. So like, there's a pretty robust Excel workbook that would be going back and forth on a daily basis to make sure that all that information is taken into account. And so we should have that like public.
And I just want to thank Cindy Higgy in particular. She went through 20 years worth of stormwater engineering projects in the city, get historical data to come up with come up with data about what we spent in the last 20 years on the stormwater infrastructure. And you know, we don't have any of this stuff centralized, so it's a ton of work. So thanks to her, she's hard on this, so just give her a shout out there.
All right, so along those lines, I want to be mindful of the time, and we're within a few minutes of 9 o'clock, but the next steps, we've kind of this is exactly what we were just talking about. I did want to point out the third focus group meeting, May 7th. And before that, critically, I guess just 2 weeks before that, April 23rd, which is not up here, but is that public meeting that we discussed. Any other thoughts that people want to share? A lot of information, but hopefully a logical progression of the first meeting. We got a lot of, to summarize what we kind of heard, we got a lot of good feedback about how to better present this to the public. And just so you know, we don't consider this group. The public, because you were informed in the first meeting, we weren't starting from the base here, we wouldn't. Have this presentation and give what we talked about here in that meeting. I just want to make sure you understand that. But that being said, some very helpful insight, and advice on how to prepare for that. We have a work cut out for us, but I think we're in a good place. Any closing words?
Thank you for coming. It's so good to have you all here. I really mean that. I'm grateful for this time. I know you all have better things to do. Maybe not better things to do, but other things to do. Glad you're here. Thanks for. It's good. This one. Thank you.